Hello, I'm Elisha Royal, and welcome to our very first interview edition of cEDH Unhinged. I'm happy you're here. Today we're going to talk with Jonas, who is a cEDH tournament grinder. There is nobody that I know that grinds more tournaments than this person today, and they are also credited with being the original creator of the Captain Sisay Primer. There's a lot to learn from this person, and I'm very excited to be speaking with them. As you can see, this is my first interview, and I made a lot of mistakes. There's a lot to learn from. My questions are rambly. They go too long and they involve too much. Jonas did a great job of working with me on that and giving the best answers that he could given my subpar questions. I promise you in the future they'll be better. As far as the editing, this interview was originally filmed from two different angles. You're only going to see one today. I had to make a trade-off between timeliness and quality of the editing. Unfortunately, I was not able to do the correct amount of editing to do this interviewee justice. However, this interview is becoming stale if I do not release it soon. So I made the trade-off there. I think you're going to get a pretty decent product that we will, again, improve in the future. But again, Jonas, I'm sorry. I wish I could have done better editing for you. You deserve better. That being said, what we've got is great, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. So without further preamble, without further preemptive apology, let's get into what is an epic 2 hours of cEDH knowledge that I'm sure everybody's going to enjoy. Thank you so much for being here. Let's get going. So in other games, you find that there are entry-level characters where you basically have a skill cap that the best players can reach pretty easily. And after that point, what you have to do is move on to characters with a higher skill cap with a bigger reward for mastering it.
Yeah.
So do you think that same property exists between those two cEDH decks that you're describing, where you have a streamlined game plan, where it's an entry-level deck, where you could teach a 60-card Storm player how that turbo Rogside deck works?
Yeah.
They could sit down, goldfish it for a few hours, and they could take it to a tournament and get their 25%, right? Is there a payoff to using the other deck that you're describing that's more of a toolbox adaptive mindset? Do you think that that's same property that exists in those other games, where once you've hit that skill cap ceiling of the Rogside deck, moving on to something like your Sisay deck is more gratifying and it is better, whatever that means?
Well, I think you raise a really interesting point in that one is more beginner-friendly because it's more reflective of things that you might experience in other aspects of Magic. Like you mentioned, 60-card players going, all right, so this is your Storm when you cast Ad Nauseam, draw a bunch of cards, and then from that you go, all right, Mana Rock, Ritual, Thassa's Oracle, Demonic Consultation, or Underworld Breach, Lion's Eye Diamond, go find Brain Freeze and go off. I do think that there is a lot of value to be gained in playing off-meta archetypes, and what I mean by that is that I think that Green-White Sisay is actually supremely positioned in the meta because of the top 10 most popular decks. When you look on EDHtop16.com, the 10 most popular decks with things like Blue Farm, Timna Thrasios, Kenrith, Rogsai, Yuriko, I think Captain Sisay actually has a even to positive matchup against all of the top 10. But there are still some things that keep her out of being a more representative deck, in that lack of colors, being in green and white, so you have a lot less stack interaction. There's also some of the win lines are not as compact as just Thassa's Oracle, Demonic Consultation, I win the game. There's also some other less common meta picks, like things with Jeska, Thrice Reborn in the command zone, are just nightmare matchups to have to deal with because they are always so incentivized, just because of the commander they have in the command zone, to kill your stuff, which makes it way easier for other opponents to win as well. So while I think that the deck isn't a top tier deck, I think it has good matchups against a lot of the top decks, and I think that it's the highest win rate that I have in any of my decks, and I've gotten over 6,000 games over the last 5 years playing the deck.
Okay, so that's an interesting set of properties that you said are both the drawbacks of the Captain Sisay deck, but are also not inhibiting you from pulling through with those wins. So the two things that I heard were not having a lot of stack interaction and those color restrictions. And I guess the color restrictions lead to the lack of stack interaction.
Yeah.
So those are almost one and the same. But, oh, excuse me, the other one was not having the Thoracle line, a compact way to win. Okay, so what I'm seeing is the combination of not having a lot of stack interaction and then having a more convoluted way to win. What I'm finding is that a lot of the best brewers with what are traditionally not the top tier decks, but always seen in the local cEDH shop, right? I'm talking about the Dahadas, the Kenris, and you can probably think about the player that I'm thinking about, but a typical way that I'm seeing them brew these lists, which are usually more interaction heavy on the stack, I'm seeing like a Kenrith list, for example, that's performed in this local meta very well at these past few tournaments. I'm seeing it with less stack interaction and layered problems that are creature-based, board state problems that layer turn after turn and to do two things. One, they inhibit the other player from winning and promote their own win. So they're fulfilling that same function and sacrificing, again, in those areas you described. Do you think that we're going to continue to see that? Do you think that the one-for-one card interaction on the stack is lowering in value in the current meta?
I think it's not necessarily that the one-for-one card interaction is lowering in quality in the meta, but that we're getting so many new cards that are being printed that can fill multiple roles. So, for example, like a card that I was super excited for in Green-White Sisay is Archdruid's Charm. And Archdruid's Charm replaced Summoner's Pact in the deck as just a tutor to find something that can work at instant speed. Yes, it is 3 green mana versus 0 mana, but I found that in a lot of my games, whatever I was using Summoner's Pact for, I wasn't able to always convert that to a win on that exact turn, so in that regard, I would be locked into paying the 4 mana at the beginning of the next turn anyway, so the 3 green mana wasn't as much of a downside. But I got to change a slot that was exclusively a tutor for only green creatures to a tutor for any creature, or a tutor for a land, or removal for the One Ring, or Underworld Breach, or a fight spell that kills Opposition Agent or Orcish Bowmasters if they're trying to interact with me. So I think that the quality of one-for-one interaction hasn't been going down. I think that we're just getting more and more things that are being printed that can fill multiple roles.
Interesting. So the competition for these cards has just gone up drastically.
Yes.
That makes sense. Moving on to a little bit more of the wider meta questions. There's been a lot of draws recently. I watched your video about your recent tournament performance. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I noticed that there were a few draws there.
Oh, there were lots.
Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so draws have always existed in cEDH as a bit of a hot button issue, let's say. Some people believe that you shouldn't be able to receive a draw at all. Like, if there's no winner declared, then nobody wins, nobody gets points. And I think that's a really bad system to try and implement, because it also doesn't reflect 60-card Magic. And the closer we are to having our format, if we want it to be treated as a competitive format, I think the closer that we have it resemble something like 60-card formats, the better. But draws have also kind of gained a new identity in cEDH that it doesn't have in a lot of the 1v1 formats. If there's a super volatile game state where, let's say, player B is going to win the game, and you have a counterspell to stop them, but you also know that if they don't win right now, you are dying to player C, who has like Najila and 20 warriors and Derevi in play or something like that. So you're stuck in this lose-lose scenario, and people will argue that why don't we just accept a draw, because it's better for all of the players involved to receive 1 point than for us to be stuck in this king-making situation of, I can't win the game, but I can choose if you win the game or if you win the game. And I think that's been kind of a actually really good development in the world of cEDH, in that it prevents a lot of those more like feels bad situations if you would get into that kind of scenario. But like, players have intentionally drawn in Magic since Magic tournaments have been happening, basically. And I think that while there are a lot of draws in the format right now, I think that at their core, they're still a really good thing to have happen. We just unfortunately run into them so often because we are 4 players at a table with 80 to 90 minutes to try and finish a game, and if the game doesn't finish in that time, if everybody's being super responsible, you are more likely to get draws than you would be in like a 1v1 format.
I think the key point is what you said right at the end there, that qualifier, if everybody's responsible.
Yeah.
Because let me describe a scenario which is very similar to what I think you just described. And it was the last tournament that I played at the Portland Game Store before I left.
Yeah.
So just a couple of weeks ago. There was a couple of turns of so the player across from me playing a mono black deck, he just got blown out, and so he's not in the game anymore. He's incentivized to draw like turn 1 or 2, like a critical hit soul ring kind of thing. And then there was 2 other players, good players in the meta, and respectable. And it's basically just grind value, basically drop rock, and then 2 Ristics are on the board, and it's just set up for mid-range grind.
Yep.
And I assemble a storm capability with my Urza deck, right? So basically just to get a Sensei's top loop. And they don't see that it's on the board, but it's presented, but the pieces are convoluted. And so I offer the draw. I'm like, there's 2 Ristics. I'm like, I have my thing here. I can't protect it. I'm like, let's just go for the draw now. And they didn't want to. And so card by card, we just played it out. And like 15 cards in, I was like, do you want to draw now? And they looked at each other. And we did. And so it's one of those things where it's like, I agree with you. If what I'm hearing you say is correct, that the draws we see in cEDH are a logical development of the game spreading to more players and becoming more common.
Yeah.
Does that add up?
I think that's partially correct, but also I think that just part of the tournament structure that we encounter in cEDH incentivizes draws, because even at the tournament that you mentioned I was at in November, where my round 1 I won, and I was like, all right, this is great. I go to round 2 and I'm paired against one of the best players that we have in Oregon, one of the best players that we have in Washington, and in my opinion the best player that we have in Washington. And they just asked me like, hey, do you want to draw? And I'm thinking, well, we've got a 30-minute lunch break, and we have 80 minutes in the round. That's an hour and 50 minutes. We can expect that we'd be back here for like 2 hours if the somebody's pod goes on like into time and around super long. Do I want to sit here and just politic for what is likely going to be a draw anyway, because all 4 of the players are playing like mid-range or stacks decks that are super responsible? We're talking over every single thread at the table of like what every single card does. Do I want to sit there and do that for 2 hours, or would I prefer a 2-hour lunch break? Especially because if we're all drawing, then each win the other of us in the pod gets enhances each other's opponent match win rate, so it improves our standings as the tournament goes on. I think I'd rather take good tiebreakers for the rest of the tournament, because I'm expecting these other people to win as well, and a 2-hour lunch break over sitting there for 2 hours and not getting lunch and just being like, ugh.
I think that guaranteed point is so valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about playing for the draw a little bit. I think that that's a new development also that we've seen, and I want to investigate that a little bit. So I explained a little bit ago to a group of friends, and it's not like it's a new idea, but it was, something I'd been investigating at the time, that once you've reached a certain win percentage win rate threshold, right? And you've identified that as kind of because that's the ultimate stat that you want. You
Yeah.
want that win rate. That's what you're there for. Once you've maximized that, the only other place to get points is converting losses to draws.
Yep.
That's the only other place to get a point. So once you've developed a play style and a deck list and something that works for you as a player that secures that, what's a good win rate? 25%, 30%, anything over 25 is really great if you're playing with the best players. It's all subjective because who you're playing with, what's the tournament. But once you've figured out what that number is for you that you're satisfied with, the other number that you're looking at is the number of losses that you could have converted to draws.
Yep.
Do you think that that is the articulated version of the movements that we're seeing in the meta where people are less inclined to go for the risky play and more inclined to go for the draw?
I think so. I think another way that we can frame that is also just, a conversation about risk versus reward. So if you see that your window is here to try and win the game, you can go, all right, well, if I jam this and I win, that's great. But there's 2 risk studies on board, and they could draw into something before I finally execute, before I actually win the game. The reward is high in that I get a win, but the risk is, at least in my opinion, probably higher at that point. So a lot of players like to turn to draws as a way to change the risk versus reward equation to be more in their favor, so there's 2 positives instead of 1 positive, 1 negative.
Okay, so that adds up to me. Now, let's talk about another aspect of the game that ties in. We talked about your optimized win percentage. Let's use that term. And then let's assume that we've optimized that next variable that we talked about, those losses that we could convert into draws. So now we're great in both of those categories. How do you get more points in that situation? I think you start looking at all the other tangential variables of the game that you can manipulate subtly, otherwise known as politics.
Yep.
That's the term that we use
politics
for it.
Is huge in cEDH.
Sure. And where I'm going with this is there is the Overton window of acceptable politics, right? And I think that there is what I would consider the dark side of the force, the dark side of politics. The only way to push that those 2 sets of variables forward is doing things that are outside the Overton window of acceptable political play. I think that you can move those percentages up by doing things that are questionable.
Okay.
Things that could be considered, again, like the dark side of the force. Do you think it's worth doing that? Do you think that's an analogy that works? Do you think that as that play is revealed to be the only avenue in order to increase that win percentage, do you think that we will move towards less polite politics?
So this question sounds to me like, do you think people should be able to lie in cEDH? Or at least that's where that conversation naturally progresses to. And for starters, I will say that I am not a person who wants to lie in order to get wins. That's just something personal for me that I don't want to do. I think that it gives diminishing returns over time. But I also think that within the rules of Magic, there is nothing there that says that you can't lie. So, do it if you want. If you do lie to, if you lie to me in a game, I will use that when I'm politicking against you in a future game. But there is not anything in the rules, and I also think that there shouldn't be anything in the rules that says players can't do something like lie for getting their wins in cEDH, but I just think that there's no way that you could effectively enforce that. And I think that the community itself does a pretty good job in the social aspect, because there is still connection between 4 players sitting down in a game where you're establishing trust and making deals and stuff like that. And I think that the community itself still does a pretty decent job of being able to like filter what kind of play experiences the players themselves want. Where if somebody lies to you to get a win in a game, and then you can bring it up to the next pod and be like, hey, don't trust what they have to say, that person's kind of been selected out in terms of the political conversation in that future game. I think that it does a good job of balancing itself. And while I did say that I am a player that I do not want to lie to get my wins, I will intentionally be very vague sometimes in order to open myself avenues of play, and it'll, in my opinion, it's on my opponents to see if it happens or not. So I have two examples that I can point to where some people might feel it's a bit dishonest, but it's just me trying to be vague enough about something and leave it on my opponents to recognize it or not. So one of which is the top 16 match that I had at this recent tournament, where top 16 got you nothing, but top 4 got you a Gaia's Cradle. And first place got you a Judge Promo Foil Gaia's Cradle. Like, it's $650 to $2,000 in profit if you win your top 16 match. And the other situation that I also had this happen was at one of our locals, where once again there was a Gaia's Cradle on the line for first, and this was in top 4 pod. So I'm going to start with the top 4 pod one first, because that is the one that happened earlier in the timeline of my cEDH career. So I'm playing Green-White Sisay. I've got Elishnorn on the battlefield, giving all my opponent's creatures -2/-2. And I've got the card Living Plane in hand. And Living Plane turns all lands into 1/1 creatures.
Got it.
And in combination with Elishnorn, it just blows up all of your opponent's lands, and they're screwed. They go so far down on mana, it's oftentimes impossible for them to come back.
Sure.
Now, at one point, I'm joking around with my friends, because 2 of my friends are also in this top 4 pod with me. And at one point, one of them, like, Gitaxian probes me, and I just revealed my hand to the table, and I'm like, yeah, dude, like, this is what I've got. And that player then also plays a Phantasmal Image to copy my Elishnorn, so that way, if I play the Living Plane, our Elishnorns cancel each other out, he gets to have lands, and I get to have lands. And then the player right before me in turn order is playing Tivit, and he casts a Mnemonic Betrayal. And this Mnemonic Betrayal will win the game.
Sure.
And one of the other players shows me a Pact of Negation, and he goes, I have this, I can use this to counter it, because, like, obviously we are going to lose if this resolves.
Yeah.
And neither I or the other player have anything to do about it. So he goes, if I cast this, will you cast Living Plane on your turn? And like I said, I wanted to be vague enough to leave myself open lines of play and leave it on my opponents to figure it out. So in my hand that they knew off of the Gitaxian probe, they could see that I had Ranger Captain of Eos, and I had like Ranger Captain of Eos, Living Plane, and like a couple lands. Nothing else of importance. And I said, so long as he has an Elishnorn, because of his Phantasmal Image copying my Elishnorn, I have no reason to cast the Living Plane. I'm not saying that I won't cast the Living Plane. I'm saying so long as he has that, I am not going to play this card.
So you're offering the condition on the table that would that makes sense. So you're just pointing out a board state fact.
Yeah.
That's what you're doing.
And so he goes, all right, well, I'm going to Pact of Negation that, and it goes to my turn, and I go, all right, cool. Play Ranger Captain of Eos. They're like, yeah, that's fine. All right, ETB trigger, go find Quirion Ranger, play it, activate targeting his Elishnorn, and because it's a Phantasmal Image, it dies. And then they go, oh no. And I crack Ranger Captain, I play the Living Plane, blow up everybody's lands.
Well,
and in that scenario, I'm like, I won't cast this so long as he has that card. They have perfect information on my hand, and at least the 2 players who I was talking to, the one who copied my Elishnorn and the one who was making the deal with me, both know that I play Quirion Ranger in my deck because it's part of my combos.
Sure.
And so I did that. I blew up all of the lands, and despite how good living played in Elish Norn tends to be in most games, we still ended up drawing. So
that is the meta these days.
Oof.
Yeah.
But in the second example, I had a similar thing happen in our top 16 match, where another player had opposition agent in play, stopping me from on-board win, where I just need to activate my commander one time to go find the last piece of the combo, play it, and I can make infinite mana, get every creature in my deck into play, and win the game.
Sure.
That same player who has the opposition agent also played a Grand Abolisher on their previous turn, and I have a Deafening Silence in play saying players can only cast one non-creature spell each turn, and we go, alright, well, we're screwed, because if we counter the Grand Abolisher, he's got blue, black mana open for exactly Thassa's Oracle Demonic Consultation, and we'll use our only point of interaction on stopping the Grand Abolisher. Luckily, another player in the pod had Silence to buy us a turn, and I could see the top card of my library through the card Eladamric Corvekdal. Just says you can cast creatures from the top of your library and look at the top of your library, stuff like that. But I play a One Ring, because that was my draw for turn, and I see that I have touched the Spirit Realm on top of my deck. So I start politicking with another player who has a Karn the Great Creator in play, going like, hey, if I attack and kill you, will you allow me to attack and kill your Karn the Great Creator, so that way I can activate this One Ring to draw Touch the Spirit Realm, which Touch the Spirit Realm does work under things like Grand Abolisher. So in their mind, they're thinking, okay, so he draws Touch the Spirit Realm, and then he can channel it on the Grand Abolisher when the guy goes for Thassa's Oracle Demonic Consultation, and then the known counterspell from another player will counter the Demonic Consultation, and we're all good.
Sure.
So that player agrees. He's like, yeah, I will let you attack and kill Karn so you can activate the One Ring and draw Touch the Spirit Realm. And I'm like, cool. That's what we've agreed to. Lock it in. I attack, I kill Karn, I activate the One Ring, draw Touch the Spirit Realm, and channel it on opposition agent. And then the player who has the opposition agent and the player who has the known counterspell both are like, that's not what you said you would do. And I'm like, no, all I said was, will you allow me to attack and kill Karn so I can activate this One Ring and draw Touch the Spirit Realm?
Sure.
The rest of you guys filled in the blanks yourself.
Got it.
I don't think that, any player should be beholden to what the table assumes that they meant rather than what they actually said. And I know that can get into a little bit more of a gray area, but like I said, I also think players should be allowed to lie, but also experience ramifications from it. So
I think that's a great nuance, because there are the greatest politicians in cEDH that I know are able to navigate that gray area, and at the end of the game, always show you how it was your mistake in interpreting their politics. And but the thing is that, like you said, there is that longevity, and with repeated play, players are able to see what they mean past the words that they're actually telling you.
Yeah.
So I think that is another skill that is basically the next step past what we're describing now, which is the lawyering and the silver-tongued politicking that some players are able to do and others are not.
Yeah.
But let's pause there for a moment, because I want to talk about your ability to recall with detail specific cards, players, interactions, board states, game states. I can't remember what I ate for lunch yesterday. And you're recalling very detailed and nuanced scenarios. Is that something that you're able to do with the most important games that you play? Or is that a property of you just having done this a lot and you can remember a lot of this stuff? What's going on there?
I think it's a little bit more of a unique scenario for me, in that I don't necessarily remember all of my games. Like you mentioned, a lot of the important games, like those ones where I'm playing for Agaya's Cradle. Those ones are really big and really important. I've also had friends tell me that I get way too into detail when I describe what happened in a game, just because I remember so many pieces of information. Last year, I was diagnosed with both autism spectrum disorder and attention deficit disorder, which as a combination means that I am very good at hyper focusing on one thing and very bad at focusing on the whole picture of a lot of other things. So when it comes to like Magic the Gathering, which is a special interest of mine, I have a much greater degree of memory than most people seem to have about like what things happen in games and when they happen, specific board states, stuff like that, which I think works to my benefit sometimes, but I also think sometimes it can work to my detriment in that there's just overload of information that can cause me to be like more flustered or not paying as much attention as I should to smaller tells in the game. Like, I'm very bad at reading people, but I'm very good at reading board states. So while I might still reach the same like conclusion of this person has Underworld Breach in hand and they're going to win right now, I'm more likely to make that distinction off of board states, cards in graveyards, cards they've put in hand, stuff like that, than I am to get it by like looking at their face or something. And I think that's a player skill that a lot of other people can pick up.
Interesting. Do you think that as the game progresses, we'll move towards more of a like high-level poker scenario where people are trying to hide those tells using, you know, some kind of veil or heavy glasses, or using a poker face or something like that? If we're heading in that direction, do you think that the skills you're describing, which is being able to use other aspects of the game in order to make your decisions outside of those aspects that are trying to be hidden by those large glasses, do you think that those skills you're describing are going to become more valuable as more players realize that they're giving information away and start to hide it?
I think so. I think that definitely we're going to see part of the psychological aspect of the game get a little bit more emphasis. One of the most common things right now is that players will be able to like figure out what somebody has in hand just because it's really easy to accidentally bleed your hand to the person to the left or right of you instead of to the person like directly across from you like you would be in 1v1 Magic. So I think that people are beginning to catch on to the like, oh hey, if I see information in their hand,
I'm going to use it.
I'm going to use it to my advantage.
Yeah.
And I think the logical development past that point is being able to gain that information if it's not somebody just bleeding cards to you.
Interesting. So I think that goes back a little bit. Maybe I'm connecting dots that aren't there to the those two variables, converting losses into draws and that win percentage, and using any tool at your disposal in order to get there. And you're not going to ignore any of these things, even if they're polite. If somebody is if I have a question after this I want to get to, but if somebody's bleeding information, you should be able to use it. And I've never seen this happen, but I think like if an opponent to your left or to your right, or I guess it's never to your right, it's always to your left, right?
Yeah, no, the way that it can be somebody to your left or right, depending on
you're right.
You're right.
Okay, yeah, you're right. You're correct. So if somebody to your left or right is bleeding information, I've never seen somebody just call out, "I see this in his hand." But I wouldn't necessarily be mad if somebody did. You know what I'm saying? Like it's so impolite. It's bad sportsmanship, right? But I also like, maybe I'm just a savage, but I would do it. Maybe I'm just mean, but it's like,
no, we definitely have a lot of players that will do that. Like there's a player Sam who plays Tazri Beacon of Unity, the like 5-color deck. He will call out when he sees like cards bleeding from your hand. And
really? So
he will do it all the time. Like,
interesting. Okay.
He will go like, "Hey, just so you know, I see you bleeding your hand. By the way, guys, he has Swan Song, so don't cast that."
Interesting. So he will do that. Well, okay. So, and how is that perceived by the other players in the group?
Frankly, I think it's perceived pretty neutrally. Just like he starts. The way he frames it is very, very good, in my opinion, where he frames it beginning by talking to the person whose hand is bleeding, going like, "Hey, I want to make you aware of this. I'm not going to like stare at your hand every single time you draw a card because I feel that's in bad sportsmanship. But if you're bleeding it to me, I will take advantage of it now, but make you aware of it so that way you don't keep doing it in the future." now I will also still capitalize on the information that I have now while still reminding you about the fact that you're bleeding cards to me and that, we don't want to be playing 2v1v1.
Let's talk about taking that not to its logical conclusions, but a little bit further down the line. Should
For
there
sure.
be specific rules developed in order to prevent players from trying to get that knowledge through ways that have not been defined right now? Because it's like there's not much that prevents me from just like really leaning back and going for take a peek at a time when a person otherwise would consider their hand to be concealed. It's like if you really go out of your way, like
we've all seen somebody like stretching like this. And...
Sure, and then there's also like situations. I mean, there's logistics of the game where we're talking about players that have to get up and go do a bathroom break. It's like, and let's say that you're just that player that I think that we can agree. It's like we're pretty tight on how we approach tournaments, and if somebody's going to get up, we're going to ask for an extension. We're going to make sure that our hands are face down. There's going to be no shenanigans, all that stuff. But it's like I see a lot of players who are like, I'm F6 in the middle of a tournament, and then going to go hit the bathroom and then come back, and then somebody's hand might just be up, and it's like, should there be? It's like, and as we're accepting the use of that information, should we be tightening the rules around these other variables, right, that are outside of the mechanics of the game that do lead to wins and losses? Should we be defining them, looking at them, and making regulations?
I don't think we should, and I'll elaborate a little bit on that. So, for starters, the thing that informs my opinion on this for why we shouldn't, I have been studying to take my level 1 judge exam. I'm going to be taking it in about a week. And so, like, I've already judged a few different tournaments, mostly cEDH tournaments, and I've gotten very familiar with the rules around player conduct. And so, I don't think that there is a way that you can implement rules specifically about, like, this player saw a card in my hand, or, like, they were walking back to the table after going to the bathroom and they saw one of their opponents with their cards up. I think that, like, if sometimes that stuff can just happen, sometimes it just happens organically, like the thing that I said about somebody bleeding their hand, but I think if somebody were like to try and look at cards through dishonest means, like the leaning back and like turning their head or something like that, if they were to do something like that, I think that the players should call a judge, raise your hand, call judge, and then just let the judge know that, like, hey, I think this person was trying to look at cards in my hand. And then, especially if that happens over and over again, then the judge or the tournament organizer can launch an investigation to see if this is a repeated pattern of behavior and can disqualify or ban somebody for unsportsmanlike conduct, rather than it being a specific rules violation, just because I don't think that there's anything within the anatomy of the rules of Magic the Gathering itself that can be formulated in a equally enforceable way to stuff like cEDH versus 60 card formats.
So we're talking about logistical aspects of the game that would prevent us having a defined set of rules that would be applicable in a way that made sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's take, oh man, like, because I'm so tempted to go down the rabbit hole of, well, then the best politicians, the only, like, there is a certain slice of the win percentage pie that exists within tournaments that is that gray area of, I'm an honest player 70% of the time.
Yeah.
In 70% of the tournaments. And like 30% of the time, I will do something adjacent to the rules to get a competitive edge, knowing that the logistical aspects of the game prevent me from, and the social aspects, frankly, if you're just a well-liked player and you know everybody, it's like, those aspects prevent you from being penalized for getting that competitive edge, right? It, like, that again looks like dark side of the force. Like if you are like really trying to push those win percentage and losses converted to draws. It's like you're looking at every little bit that you can get. And once you've maxed out mechanics, once you, like yourself, can just recall every single card and why you'd play it and the decks that play it and stuff like that. And once you've mastered your politics and you can read somebody's face and be like, oh my goodness, he's doing this and he's got this in the graveyard and this many in his hand. This is the percentage chance, like counting cards in blackjack, that he's about to put out a win. Once you've like mastered that, again, I think that you're looking at those gray area things. So it is interesting to hear your perspective that just those logistical hurdles of the tournament process, as opposed to 60 card Magic and other games like chess, prevent us from putting in rules and regulations that could be equally applicable with any logic. I don't want to put words in your mouth, and that was a lot.
For sure.
So, but yeah.
I think this also relates back to what we were talking earlier about the social aspect of the game. Like, if you are super mechanically tight in your play, you know all of the rules interactions, you know how all of the card interactions would go. If you know all of that stuff, if the next logical step is just enhancing your politics, even if that includes something like seeing your opponent's hand and using that information to your advantage,
like Sam,
you also have to deal with whatever social aspect comes from that, because like players wouldn't necessarily enjoy being told like, hey guys, this guy has this in his hand and he has this in his hand and he's this and this, and if you're doing that over and over again, I think it helps the entire community become more aware of ways in which to not allow that to happen. As well as it just makes players more aware. Let's say if that is something that you do consistently, that's going to spread around. People talk to each other. We are all here to play Magic, and there are enough like unique friend groups within your local area that they will talk to each other. They will communicate to each other. So like, we actually had this happen with one of our best players last year before he started going to college, where he would lie all of the time in order to get wins. And eventually it just spread that like, hey, don't listen to a damn thing he says.
Just straight up lying?
Yeah, just like straight up lying. Like he would make deals like, oh, hey, I'm going to copy this demonic tutor, but I'm just going to grab a Rhystic study instead. And he's like, no, here's my win. And I'd ask like, did you find Rhystic study? Fuck no. It's like, all right, well, nope. None of that.
It's like, that's so tough, because it's again one of those things where like I wouldn't do that because I got to play with these players again, exactly like you described. But if it was this tournament that you just described that you played in, and it's for a guy's cradle, I wouldn't fault you for doing that, and I wouldn't have faulted the other players for doing that in order to secure a win. So do you think that there's a difference when you're playing again for the trophy of trophies at that highest level? Do you think that there's a gap for a lie in those games?
I think it's more understandable that people would turn to it. I don't necessarily view that as like a evaluation of their lie or not. I think it's more about that person's own moral code, and like everybody's different, everybody's more flexible on it. Some people, like the person I described a few seconds ago, will be like, yeah, I will lie whenever, even in practice games, because like
it's a part of the game.
It's part of the game.
Yeah,
get screwed.
Sure.
Versus other people who will be like, no, I will never ever tell a lie or even be anything in the gray area. I think it's just more so of a moral evaluation of the people themselves, who are not a moral evaluation, but it's more so an evaluation of the people who are making those kinds of plays. And like in my case, I'm not somebody who wants to lie, but like I said, I will like sometimes I will leave gray. And also I will clarify that the tournament for Guy's Cradle in top 4, where I had that kind of thing happen, was a few months ago. It was last year. And then the other time that I had mentioned, where I was playing for it in the top 4 pod, that was over a year ago. So like in 99.5 or 6 or 7% chance of the time, I'm not even trying to like change anybody's perspective about anything. I'm still sticking to my moral code, but I don't know. Also, sometimes those prices are so enticing, you know?
Yes, yeah. All right. Let's talk about developing a primer.
Sure.
There's a lot of people that try and fail to take over the name of a particular commander. Really say that, like, I'm the person that does this thing. Do you believe that you are the Captain Sisay guy?
Yes and no. What I mean by that is that, like, most people know me as the Captain Sisay guy. I am the guy who has the most consistent, best results on Captain Sisay at, like, larger scale tournaments with people at, like, 60 plus players. That said, I am not the Captain Sisay guy in that I'm the only person who matters when it comes to the commander. I owe a lot of my success with Captain Sisay to both the Conclave Discord, which is the unified green-white cEDH Discord, and just other Captain Sisay players, more specifically from the Concord or from the Conclave server. But like, the deck would look drastically different if I were just in an echo chamber by myself doing it. A lot of the deck list changes have occurred because of input from the other players. And so, like, they were the first ones who figured out that, like, oh, hey, if I put Magus the Candelabra in green-white Sisay, that card's fucking cracked because it's a one-card combo with the commander, and it's also works really well with Gaia's Cradle and making tons of mana. It's fetchable off of Ranger Captain of Eos. It's... So, like, I had nixed a lot of those ideas for myself until other people encouraged me to try it, and then I was proven wrong. I'm like, wow, this is really, really good. I should be playing this. So, yeah, I would say that I am the Captain Sisay guy in as far as I wrote the primer for Captain Sisay, and most people, if they know a Captain Sisay player, they know about me, but I am not the only authority when it comes to talking on matters of the commander.
Okay, well, let's try and pin you down just a little bit. So you wrote the primer, and you're not the guy, you're a guy. I would make the case that you're the guy, and I'll try and have you prove me wrong here. If you are not the Captain Sisay guy, who is?
I don't think that there's any one guy, though. Like, that's part of why I say yes and no to it, in that if you have to choose any one person on planet Earth, it's probably me. But
that's what I was getting to.
Like, I didn't get here myself. I didn't get here purely on the laurels of my own accomplishments with the deck.
Okay, we'll pause there a second.
Bark, bark, bark.
Oh. How you doing, lady?
And the camera file from the laptop and combine them on DaVinci Resolve is the editing software that I use.
Okay, nice. I just looked at that. I'm not familiar with it, but it works pretty well.
Oh, I think so. I think it's great. Also, DaVinci Resolve is free, and it's, like, super easy to use. It's nice. Super easy to pick up.
Perfect. Yeah, that is it open source or is it just free?
I think it's just free.
Nice. Well, I mean, as long as I can use it.
Yeah.
So we were talking about developing a primer, and that you are one of the Captain Sisay authorities.
Yeah.
Do you feel like the amount of work that you've put in order to do that has been, in a sense, worth it? Do you think that you would end up doing this anyways because that's just what you're interested in with how you interact with cEDH? How has that journey been with Sisay, Captain Sisay specifically?
Yeah, so well, I guess in order to get the, like, full scope of the story, we have to start back at me buying my first Magic card, which was Captain Sisay, when I was 12 years old. Wow, so okay, like 15 years ago. So yeah, that's literally the first Magic card I ever owned, and I got into cEDH because my casual play group, my freshman year of college, banned me from playing Captain Sisay because it was the only deck that I had, and the player patterns of like, all right, activate Sisay, here's Reki, History of Kamigawa, activate Sisay, here's Avacid, Angel of Hope, activate Sisay, here's Elishnorn, Grand Cenobite, just got so tiring for them that they're like, we don't want to play against this. You win every game. And it wasn't that I was like playing a super powerful version of the deck, it's just that, you know, flexibility and adaptability is a really, really strong trait to have. And so then I was like, all right, well, I know some people play Paradox Engine in this deck. What does that look like? And so I started looking at Paradox Sisay in summer of 2019, and it was like right after that, I put the deck together, I started playing it, I fell in love with cEDH. A month later, Paradox Engine gets banned. But by that point, I was already so invested in cEDH, and I'd already built like 2 other cEDH decks. And so I was like, all right, well, I'm here to stay anyway.
Sure.
But over the course of the next like 6-7 months, I kept having that nagging feeling in the back of my mind of like, I really want to play Sisay again. I really want to play Sisay again.
Sure.
And luckily, they started printing more and more cards that I think made the deck viable again, that did not have it hinge on Paradox Engine was the only way that you could win the game. And so they started printing Emil the Blessed, Ashaya Soul of the Wild, and Kogla the Titan Ape, all of which had infinite mana combos with some creatures that already existed in the format, like Korean Ranger, Hope Tender, Village Bellringer, Magus of the Candelabra. All of them could combo with a few of those cards, and I was like, well, I already want to play these in the deck anyway. And a friend of mine pointed me to a deck called Sisay Monster Friend that used Vivian Monsters Advocate and Emil the Blessed, where you would use Sisay, fetch Emil, use Sisay, fetch the Vivian. You play Vivian, and then use your -2 ability that says the next time you play a creature, you search your deck for a creature with less mana value and put it directly into play. And so then you'd go, all right, -2, cast Emil the Blessed, trigger, go find Village Bellringer, and untap all of my creatures. And then so long as you had creatures that made in total 4 mana from tapping abilities, then you could make infinite mana by using the Emil to flicker the Village Bellringer over and over again. And so I took that list, and then I was like, all right, well, I don't like this win condition after they've made infinite mana, so I'm going to swap that out for this other thing, and then they're not on a Shaya combo, so I'm going to add that in too, and then started working on the deck. And from there, I submitted it to the cEDH decklist database. It got accepted onto the cEDH decklist database, and I was like, great, this is awesome.
Nice.
And then over the course of like the next year or so, I was like, all right, so I have 2 infinite mana combos. Actually, I have 6 infinite mana combos. Actually, I have 9 infinite mana combos. Actually, I have 14 infinite mana combos, just figuring out new lines using all of the cards that I was already playing.
Yeah.
And so then from that point, we were like, all right, we have so many variable, like layered win conditions, and you mentioned layering win conditions earlier. You have so many different layered win conditions. We'll parse this down and refine the deck a little bit more. And then after doing that for a little bit, that was when I got my first like big tournament win, with Sisay winning the Chaos 7 charity event that was played with 74 players over Discord. And that definitely got a lot more public eyes on it, on top of the fact that it was accepted to the cEDH checklist database. Like, I have screenshots on my phone of people asking, like, what's the hardest deck in the cEDH? And multiple people, including reviewers for the cEDH decklist database and managers of the decklist database and content creators, being like, I think Green-White Sisay is probably the hardest deck to play in this format, just because you're locked into lower colors with not a ton of stack interaction, and you have to know what everybody at the table is doing.
Sure.
In order to know how to stop every single person at the table. But yeah, because of the kind of notoriety that I gained from being like the person to revive Sisay, even though I wasn't the only person who did it. Like my friends Rankin and Scout, who were the guys who made the Sisay Monster Friend deck in the first place. I stole their deck list and then made some changes to it. Then they changed their deck list to more closely reflect mine. And then a bunch of us all got together to just keep iterating on the deck over and over again. But a lot of the notoriety that I gained as like the Sisay guy helped me kind of define my position in cEDH a lot more. Like, I have my own YouTube channel that I cover stuff in. I am now the admin of the Conclave Discord because they transferred ownership of it to me.
Wow. Okay.
I am a moderator for the largest cEDH Facebook group. I am also a member of the review team for the cEDH decklist database now. Like, I've gotten the chance to do so many more things as a part of the cEDH community because of the position I find myself in from being the Sisay guy, the green-white Sisay guy. And so, yeah, even if I didn't have the help from everybody else, I absolutely would have done it over and over again.
So there are not that many people in the cEDH community that contribute in major ways. Everybody contributes to the scene. Everybody's important. Everybody, again, there's not that many cEDH players, so everybody that we can get is fantastic.
Yeah.
But there are not that many players that push the envelope and discover new things that are viable, establish it as indisputable, verified by statistics and tournament performance fact. This is a thing that works. There's not that many of those, and you've described the trajectory that somebody goes through traditionally during a particular time frame. When they progress through that path as somebody kind of pushing the envelope, discovering new things, I think that that's pretty typical. They get associated with the deck because if you're pushing the envelope, you're doing it with something. My question is, now that you've done that, you mentioned that you're going to take Rogsai to this tournament tomorrow.
Yep.
So I'm trying not to look too far into that before I ask this next question. Do you feel tied to Captain Sisay? Do you think that you can branch out and do other things? If it's still viable, do you feel like you are advocating some sort of position that you should be in when you're playing other decks?
It's a good question. Well, I think let's break that down into the smaller parts. And the first thing that you asked was, do I feel tied to Captain Sisay? And I think the answer is indisputably yes. Like, there's no shot that I'm ever like getting rid of Sisay. If I'm playing cEDH, I'm going to be playing that deck for my entire lifetime in cEDH. Now, the second part of it was you asked if like players can branch out, and I think that's actually something that has helped me stay in the cEDH community a lot longer than I would have had I been stuck to just one deck. Because when you're on just one thing, like you're ride or die that one thing, if it feels like you're dying, then you don't want to engage in the hobby so much anymore. So a good way that I've been able to avoid total burnout whenever it feels like playing Sisay is not going well is just playing different archetypes or playing different formats of Magic even. So I've played a ton of cEDH decks in my lifetime playing in the format, but the 5 that I have built currently are Green-White Sisay, the Gitrog monster, Tymna Malcolm midrange midrange ad nauseum, Tymna Thrasios, just midrange hell, and Rograk Silas Turbo ad nauseum, which you mentioned I'm going to be planning to play in this event tomorrow. And I think it's not only important to practice a diverse set of skills to enhance my ability as a player, but also I think practicing a variety of archetypes between your fast combo decks, between your mid-range decks, between your stacks decks. I think practicing a diverse set of skills also helps prevent you from feeling burnt out on any one way to play the game.
That makes sense. So when you are evaluating cards, what perspective do you do it from? Do you think that you do it from a generalist perspective in relation to all of those 5 decks that you listed, or do you evaluate things primarily from that Captain Sisay lens?
Well, I think it's not a Captain Sisay specific lens, but it's a specific deck focused lens. So let's say, for example, I see a card like what's a really good one that's been printed in the last few years, like Marvin Murderous Mimic. Marvin Murderous Mimic from Duskborn is exceptionally good in specific decks. He's not good in every deck, so like I play him in Green White Sisay because he can be an extra Sisay activation. I've had games where he is in one turn a Max the Candelabra, Quirion Ranger, Sisay, Yi-San, and Emil the Blessed for like the whole turn. He is exceptionally powerful in that one deck. Something like Tim Thrasios doesn't really align with the strengths of that deck in the same way, in that there were fewer consistent activated abilities, and the major difference between that and something like Green White Sisay, where Marvin really shines, is that if he's copying my commander's activated ability, it's pay 4 mana, scry 1, and draw a card, versus tap, so it's not repeatable unless I have something else that's untapping it, to get a card of any legendary type that I want into my hand. So I tend to evaluate cards more individually on where I think they might shine, whether that is in a specific off-meta deck like Green White Sisay, or if that's something like, let's say Delny Streetwise Lookout. I'm like, this card is really good in Tymna decks, because goddamn, it doubles Tymna draws. That already is really good. But also in something like Tymna Malcolm, where your other commander is also something with 2 or less power that has a triggered ability, then this card's even better in that kind of scenario than it is in like Tymna Thrasios or Blue Farm.
See that level of knowledge I find intimidating as another player, because I don't. I mean, I'm an exception in that I only play Urza, right? So I know a lot about a specific deck, but I feel like if I was swapping my time equally between, let's say, 3 decks or 5 decks in your case, if there's overlap between that deck selection between you and I, if I know that, you know, you spend 20% of your time, you know, playing that Tymna Thrasios, it's like, and I just swapped to it 6 weeks ago and I've been putting in the reps since the ban, it's like I might be intimidated, feeling like you might know my deck better than I do. At least I would if I was playing. I mean, if you told me that you knew Urza better than I did, you know, given your knowledge, I'd believe you. But I'd feel really insecure if I hopped on another deck and knew that you spent any portion of time playing it. Do you think that deck knowledge of your opponent's game plan wins that many games? Obviously it's a plus, but do you really think it turns the corner for you sometimes?
Oh, absolutely. Like, I think it is irrefutable in my experience to say that having knowledge about what your opponents are trying to do or what their decks are capable of earns you percentage points. Like, I had a tournament a couple years ago that I went to where I sat down at the table and I see I'm going first, and then there's Falco Spara Pact Weaver, Inella Archmage Ritualist, and Kenrith at the table. And I started talking to the players, and then the Falco Spara player plays a Devoted Druid, and I was like, hey guys, watch out, he just needs the Sensei's Divining Top and he draws his deck. And then the other players are like, what? And I start explaining it. I'm like, so Falco Spara Pact Weaver says that you can cast the top card of your library if you remove a counter from a creature you control. Devoted Druid taps to put a -1, or taps to make a green mana, and then you put a -1/-1 counter on it to untap it. So then you use that green mana and that -1/-1 counter to cast the Sensei's Divining Top from the top of your deck, and then you activate top, draw a card, put it on top, do the same thing over again, and then you draw your deck. And he was like, I have never met a single person who could tell me what my deck does to my opponents.
Yeah.
And after the game, I ended up winning that game, and that guy was like, who the hell are you? He's like, who are you? What are you doing? And I was like, oh, hi, I'm the guy who manages the Green-White Sisay deck for the cEDH decklist database.
Sure.
I look at every single deck that gets submitted to it. Part of that is that I'm very lucky to be on the review team now, so I get to see when people are brewing new things. But yeah, I think it's very important to know what your opponents have access to, what they're trying to do, because if you can leverage that in table politics to the rest of your opponents, so that way they don't let anything slide, then especially if you can like disguise that kind of information for yourself, like most people don't know how green white Sisay wins.
Yeah.
And so I'll have a combo piece in play and just like pass turn and they won't do anything to touch it because they don't know it's a combo piece.
Sure.
Then it gets back around to my next turn and I win the game with it and they're like, "Oh boy, I never saw that coming." And I was like, "Yep." And I wasn't going to tell you it was coming, but if somebody does know what it is and points it out, then I'll try to do something to like disguise or disrupt the information a little bit, because the more you get to control information as the player, the higher your win rate will be.
Do you think that the streamlined game plan popular decks suffer from just being pretty much known information to the average player?
I think to an extent, yeah. So I think that there are definitely percentage points that you gain in cEDH just by going, all right, well, I know how to stop exactly this thing, and then they don't really have any other options. So do that, and you're done. Like, if you stick a Rule of Law in play and a Thalia Guardian of Thraben or something against a Rogsai player, then they're having a real bad day.
Yeah.
But I think that a lot of the strengths of the more like meta cEDH decks come in how consistent and how high quality they are. So, like, we talked for a long time last year about how Blue Farm was like undeniably the best deck.
It was.
And yes, it was, and I still think that it probably is the best deck in the format at this
Debatable.
point. But it's like between that and Tymna Thrasios now.
Okay.
But the big strength of Blue Farm is that they only really have two ways to win the game of Thassa's Oracle and Underworld Breach.
They're bottlenecked.
They're bottlenecked in exactly those two win conditions, but just the core of the deck of 2-card draw engines in the command zone plus all fast mana and interaction makes it so it's still incredibly difficult to stop them from at some point having access to one of those two win conditions.
I see.
So, like, I think I've got a great matchup against Blue Farm because I can specifically target those two things, and then the rest of the game becomes about defending my things from the Blue Farm player. But yeah, I think that while it can be a detriment sometimes in that some decks can be more bottlenecked on their game plan, I think, especially for the meta decks, a lot of them have high enough card quality or high enough consistency that they can offset some of those downsides.
That makes sense. Let's pivot a little bit. So we play cEDH, and I don't think that there's much of an argument that there are not many women in the cEDH scene. When we look at casual EDH, they're present. There's not an overwhelming number of them, but I think that there's not a lot of debate that as we move into the competitive side of things, playing the same game, same rules, there's a drop-off. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's partially true of Magic in general, right? Like, you might find some people at your local game store, you might find some women at your local game store playing Magic, but if you're going to like a Grand Prix or Pro Tour or some higher level event like that, I think it just kind of exacerbates the issue that there's not a lot of representation of women or of like trans people or queer people in the Magic the Gathering community, just because it is such a male-dominated hobby. That said, I don't think that there's a significant disparity of women or queer folk in the cEDH community compared to like other Magic formats. The exception being Casual Commander, where there's a lot less investment, and so it's a lot easier for people to get into.
That last point, there's a lot less investment, it's easier for people to get into. How does that relate to women getting to the format?
That's a good question. So I think if we want more women to be participating in playing cEDH, I think we have to, first of all, show that we are a inclusive space. Like, it's one thing to say like, oh yeah, I play Commander. Do you want to come get a Commander game? It's another thing to be like, hey, I think you're a real great player, and we've got this space of a lot of people who have very similar mindset to you when it comes to playing games of Magic. Would you like to come and try this out? One being like the first one being more of like accepting a person's presence in your space, another being inviting them to your space. And so I think if we want to see more representation of women, queer identities in the cEDH space, I think giving an invitation to them first and foremost would be a good starting off point.
I like that last point that you're making, where you have to be not only receptive to their presence, which obviously we should be, but you have to be proactive in inviting them to that space. I was talking on the phone with a friend of mine yesterday, and he was going to the meetups at the Lucky Lab, which has been growing. I haven't actually been able to make it myself there yet, but he was saying that Topher, who, shout out to Topher, staple of the community, hope to get him on here, that he was very proactive in pulling people off the side and saying, we've got a game here, are you ready to play? We've got a game here, would you like a game? And that they just really appreciated that. And I have no doubts that Topher would be doing that regardless of that person's identity. I think that's really cool. So I think that inviting people into the scene, you're right. I think that we could be doing more of that as a group. Because I'm sitting here thinking like we must be doing something wrong. If I mean, it's one thing to have it be a little bit skewed gender wise. You look at video games, I think that's pretty analogous.
Yeah.
But wow, when you look at some of these tournaments we're going to in person, it's skewed. And I think that we should try and change it. I'm sure you agree, but I was interested on your perspective. Thank you for giving it.
Of course.
Okay, let's talk about performance anxiety at tournaments and tournament anxiety, because speaking from personal experience, I'm like, there every once in a while, like my heart rate will get going. I'm sitting here like really feeling anxious, at the beginning of that tournament and stuff like that. I'll have to duck out, get a drink of water, come back. Do you experience any of that?
Oh, 100%.
How do you deal with it?
So I think first and foremost, just making sure that you are feeling comfortable in the space. Like if you are interacting with people in a pod, if you just open up with like cracking a joke or something, getting to know people, I think it helps everybody at the table be a lot less anxious about whatever might happen in the game. Furthermore, I think definitely taking care of yourself, like you mentioned, drinking water. Also, getting sleep the night before is also super, super important. Just taking deep breaths. Like I have, I try to take deep breaths whenever I'm feeling a little bit anxious, and I literally have a stress ball in my bag that I bring with me to Magic events. So I'm like, if I absolutely need to, I'm just like, all right,
that's what you break out.
I'm squeezing the stress ball, taking deep breaths, and just try to take it one thing at a time. Also, my therapist has been recommending that I start doing like butterfly tapping in rhythm with how fast my mind is going.
Interesting. Okay.
So if my mind is racing, then start super fast and then slow it down, and it can help, like it psychosomatically helps you calm down as the pace of your thoughts start decreasing with the pace of the butterfly tapping. Alternatively, if you really need to focus on something, you start slow and then gradually increase in speed. But let's also talk about what it looks like when you don't have a good handle on your anxiety for an event.
Sure.
And that's when we tend to see a lot of people, and like I'm guilty of doing this too, get really excited or upset about some result, or they might make a misplay. It happens. It happens a lot.
I've been there.
I've also totally been there. Like I had another one of those tournaments up in Washington, like the one that I got a Gaia's Cradle at for top 4 a few months ago. I was playing at that tournament, and I had no sleep the night before. I had like literally nothing, and I crushed the Swiss rounds. I had 3 wins and 2 draws, no losses, and I was like, I am the best player here. I'm first in Swiss. Like, I'm killing it. And then we get to my top 16 match, and because I didn't get any sleep, I just totally crashed. And I threw away a game that I found out later I could have totally won. And
do you remember the specifics there? The misplay?
I do remember it specifically. So it was, the pod was me going first, playing Green White Sisay, and then Blue Farm, Italy, Primal Conqueror, and Minskin Boo Timeless Heroes.
Losing to some meta decks right there.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Except it's the Blue Farm player that ended up winning.
Okay.
But I played against the Blue Farm player earlier in the Swiss, and so he already knew what my deck was capable of, so he just wanted to hard target me. Now, Italy was off to a super fast start. I was able to set them back, and then the Italy player was super upset by the fact that I stopped him from winning the game, and so he started exclusively targeting me. Like, he flipped Italy and tried to kill only me, and I'm like, dude, relax. Like, this doesn't need to happen. And then I go to activate my commander, Blue Farm flashes an opposition agent, which is a bit of a problem for me.
Sure.
So then I am thinking, like, all right, so I've got these cards in hand. He's got opposition agent. He later also plays an Orcish Bowmasters, and he also bleeds a what's the name of it? Diabolic Intent to me. So he needs to be able to sacrifice something, and he can tutor through his deck.
Sure.
I've got Yasharn and Placeable Earth in play that says players can't pay life or sacrifice non-land permanents to cast spells or activate abilities.
Okay, so he can't Diabolic Intent.
So he can't do the Diabolic Intent. He also can't crack his fetch land that he's got because Yasharn stops paying life.
Sure.
He's also got like a Culling the Weak in hand that he also bled to me. And then it gets to the Italy, and the Italy goes, all right, swing at you again. And what I should have done is I should have just said, look, I know that you are upset that I Urza's Rune is blasted and cleared away all of your shit before. But if you do this right now, I am forced to block with Yasharn, otherwise I die. Blue Farm has more cards in hand than the rest of us combined.
And those will be seen in a second.
And those will be
gone, yeah.
And I should have also mentioned that, like, I see he has Diabolic Intent. With him having more cards in hand, giving him a tutor means that it is exceptionally likely that we just lose the game on this turn.
Okay.
So what you can do instead is, like, I'm already shut off by the opposition agent that player has already. Attacking me to get me out of the game doesn't do anything to help the rest of us. What you should do instead is just attack the Blue Farm player, because he has to block with his Orcish Bowmaster or the Orc Army token or the opposition agent. He's not blocking with the opposition agent because, I mean, that unlocks me to get back into the game. He could block with the Orc Army, in which case he doesn't have the ability to Culling the Weak and Diabolic Intent while still having opposition agent in play. So attacking him takes him off of cards, whereas attacking me gives him cards.
So what I'm hearing are the equivalent of, like, the realizations after you have the argument in the shower, like, man, this was the best comeback.
Yep.
And it's really frustrating because you see the potential for that moment and how you missed it. And what I'm hearing is because you didn't get some sleep the night before, you weren't able to see that. And that must be frustrating.
It is a little bit, because, like, at that event, you didn't get anything for top 16. It was only the top 4 that got prizes. And all of the prizes were, like, dual lands, a Grim Monolith, a Wheel of Fortune, stuff like that. And so getting top 4 was literally hundreds of dollars in profit versus getting nothing at all.
Sure.
And so,
feast or famine there.
So after that happened, and I had to block with Yasharn and go, all right, now do we just lose to Blue Farm? And then we immediately lost to him. I was so frustrated that I ran out into or I didn't run out, but I walked out to the parking lot right outside, and it's this massive parking lot. I went as far away from the store as possible, and I just screamed, ah! It's so frustrating.
Yeah.
And then after that, drove home.
Yeah,
After that, drove home for
like
4 hours,
yeah.
and it was like, ugh, this is such a terrible way to finish what was a great day because I was crushing the Swiss rounds despite not having any sleep. But yeah, in the future, after that point, I was like, all right, I am making it a point that I will try to work out my sleep schedule several days before the event so that there's no possibility of me not getting sleep the night before.
So there's two kinds of mistakes. There's mistakes that you make, and there's mistakes that you perceive your opponents making. Typically, it's good whenever your opponents are making mistakes, right? But sometimes they make mistakes that are in somebody else's favor. It's a weird paradox where I need my opponents to make a mistake to leave me a gap, but I don't want my opponent to make a mistake and leave them a gap.
Yeah.
So there leads to, again, two kinds of frustration. Oh my goodness, I left somebody a gap. I'm mad at me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guilty of that one.
I had that happen at our local at Guardian last month, even.
And then there's the second kind of frustration where somebody else is leaving a gap, and I'm frustrated at them. Because you never blame the person who slides through the gap, right?
Yeah.
You just don't. They're the winner. That's how you do it. Which one do you identify more with? I made a mistake and that's upsetting to me, or somebody else is making a mistake and that's upsetting to me?
Well, I don't know if there's any correct answer of which one you should be, but I think I definitely align more with the blaming myself for if I lose a game, even if it's somebody else's misplay. I'm like, I should have talked them out of it. It's on me for not talking them out of attacking me for lethal damage when they could have just done the other thing instead.
Yeah, that's what I was noticing about your answer, and I'm glad that you identified the same thing, was that you were describing the actions of another player, and what you did was tell me your perspective with the tools that you had, that Yasharn and the block and the swing, and that there was a gap for you to politic and explain your perspective that came to you later. That's a certain level of accountability for the flow of the game that you don't see from the average player. The average player would chalk that up to, this other player didn't see that the Yasharn was essential, and it's not on me to explain that. That person should, it's not on me to ask. Maybe they have an answer for the other person, and there's a lot of ways to explain that away. What my question is, where does that level of accountability come from for the flow of the game, and why do you look at the mistakes of another player and say, that's something I should, could, and will prevent in the future?
Yeah, so a friend of mine, Nick, not the same Nick that you mentioned earlier, but my friend Nick Hammond has this saying about cEDH players are basically toddlers trying to kill themselves, and it's on you to have to stop them from killing themselves.
Yeah.
Which can be a bit of a derogatory way to frame what I think is otherwise a really good point of a lot of times players can make mistakes that will benefit somebody else more than it benefits them. And I think that if you want to win more games with cEDH, if you can direct the table's attention to making those mistakes in your favor, then I mean you stand to gain so much. That's the king of politics.
It is. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that is the beauty of politics, isn't it? Okay, so let's talk about tilt. Tilt is a part of the game. I get tilted. I get salty.
Same.
I find myself after games apologizing.
I've done that too.
Fair enough. I have witnessed the famous, infamous, whatever you'd like to attach it, the well-known Jonas table smack. It clearly can't be a one-time thing. Give me a percentage of games, 1 out of 100, that you think hand comes down on table.
2%.
2 out of 100.
The only problem is that I work as a vocal musician, and because of that, I'm really good at projecting and being loud. So that even if it's 2 times out of 100, or less than that. It's probably actually less than that, but despite the fact that it's not as many times as like somebody who has more of a reputation of like having to smack the table all the time something doesn't go their way, the fact that I can be so much louder at doing it calls it to attention a lot more.
Fair enough. So 2%, fair enough, and a noticeable 2%. That's
It's 2% that feels like 8% just because it's 4 times louder.
Okay, all right, fair enough. And what I'm trying to attach that to is what we talked about earlier, where I was trying to get to, do you identify with personal mistakes or external mistakes more? Do you feel like that 2% of games, are you making gameplay mistakes that yourself is resulting in our table smack, or is that an external mistake that you're realizing? What's the mindset? What's, as the hand coming down, what is the is it an internal or an external origin?
Yeah, so it varies. Most of the time, it will just be that I'm expressing that I'm really dissatisfied or that I feel I'm being treated unfairly. Like I had a situation at one of our locals recently where somebody was lying to the pod and I was calling them out on it, and then in order to prevent me from calling them out on it, they would talk over me, so I was literally not allowed to speak at all. And I was so frustrated because this person was trying to control the narrative of the table conversation that was going on just to exclude me and target me because that would open them up avenues to win the game. And so while I was really frustrated about everything that was going on, in that instance, I'm not trying to like be super frustrated, or I'm not trying to like have an outburst. Like nobody ever wants to have an outburst about any of this stuff, but I was having a difficult time effectively communicating that I felt I was being treated unfairly while somebody was also not allowing me to speak.
Yeah, that's an unusual combination that would also make me upset. Um, did that tactic work for that player? Did they win that game?
They did win that game.
Okay, so is it at the resolution of that game using that particular tactic of speaking over you and not allowing you to point out board state problems and politic effectively? Was it at the conclusion of the game that hand comes down? Is that?
It was at the conclusion of that after all of that stuff had already gone on. And I talked with this player afterwards and was like, hey, I consider you a friend. I don't appreciate being treated that way. I would like it if you don't do that in the future. Like, I understand that this is a game you're trying to win. I also think that, you know, I don't want to be treated this way. And if you value our friendship, I would like, even if you stand to gain something from it in a game, I would appreciate as your friend if you don't treat me that way.
Just a different level of respect.
Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting note to find out afterward, that you were doing that in response to a particular player and that you two had known each other, because it seems that the typical cEDH relationship is very respectful. Like, I can't imagine that that would be a typical political move. And I'd be interested to know if they would have used the same tactics of over talking your politics and your style of politics, which they're familiar with, obviously. If they would have used that same thing against a stranger, or if that was a tool that they were able to employ against you effectively, because they knew you personally. Like, you're able to get away with that. It's like, man, if somebody was intentionally over talking me or and disrespecting me that way, it's like I don't really have a great tolerance to that stuff, and I can imagine there'd be some side eye and a judge call, like, can I get a word in here? But because you guys have this ongoing relationship, you're gonna have to play another game. It's like you don't want to be a crybaby and call a judge and on my friend in a game, or even an acquaintance that I'm gonna have to see again in the future. Like, there's a social aspect to it. And so the core of my question is that longevity of we have to play later. It also exists in the competitive format. How heavy is the social aspect between knowing players? Should more be done in order to separate players that really know one another?
Well, what do you mean by separate?
So I think that there's a certain level of arbitrary pairing that goes on with the current software that we use for our
Mhm.
competitive scene, right? And it changes every once in a while. It's in flux, but I think that more could be done to make sure that there are not. I think that right now we prioritize not having repeat games where we see each other at the
Yeah,
table again. We should keep doing that,
I
but I
agree.
think opening game one against somebody that I play with regularly that can just like yourself play my deck almost as well as I can because they see it all the time. It's like that's a really tough opening game. It's like if we could also prioritize, as another variable, putting players, setters pair of them, all things equal, with people that they're not super familiar with, I think it would be a more fair game. Like I just think it's so unlucky that again, that pod that you described playing against, that you just looked around the room and you're like, how about we draw? It's like getting matched up against Devin, game one.
Yep.
That sucks.
Devin was one of the people in that round two that I was paired against that I was like, all right, so Devin and I are taking a draw.
Yeah. No, I mean, like he's another knowledgeable player who can do what I call narrate your gameplay to the
Yep.
point where it's like you're not going to get away with anything. You're not sneaking anything in there.
That's one of my favorite things about playing with Devin, where I think it's one of my strengths where I can tell a table what somebody is going to do. Devin can do that, but will also garner the additional goodwill of doing that for his own game plan. He's like,
Yes,
yeah,
yeah.
I've got this combo piece in play, you should kill this.
Mm.
And I'm like, I can't politic against Devin because every time I ever would try to, he would be, at any point I would have to bring something up against him, he will agree with and garner better goodwill with the table than I would.
So it was so funny. So I just started hopping on Spell Table, right?
Yeah.
And I joined the league. And that's not something I've done very much, but I played a game with Devin and I didn't know it was him until after the game. And I tried politicking, and it was one of these things where it's like I can't recall the specifics
Yeah.
like you can, but I asked, I'm like, can I get away with or something was on the stack, and I'm like, and I had something in my hand. I'm like, oh, can I use this as an answer to persuade you to not do that? And he just like looked at the card, and he's just like, no. He's like, there's nothing you can do with that card that's gonna prevent
Yep.
me from. I think he was bouncing my Urza or something like that, and I'm just like, oh my goodness. And it was just like one of these moments where it was such a like it was such a like a on my move like such a dumb attempt at politics of just like, let me just toss some spaghetti at the wall and like hopefully it sticks, and in exchange for that attempt I'm gonna bleed this information, and maybe that info of this I think it was like a flood mall, like
Yeah.
maybe because they know that I have this, like they won't do something. And it was just like Devin did a great job of swiftly like looking at it, giving a 3-second pause, being like, that one, thanks for the info, and two, like that doesn't do that, like two, that no, like it was
Two, absolutely not.
yeah, exactly, yeah, and it was, so you're just not going to get away with that kind of stuff. So again, I guess circling back to the original point, it's like I think that the software that we use in order to organize these events, there's not that many of us. We play against each other all the time. So obviously you can't split each other up too much, but there are a couple of players where I'm like, dude, like you know exactly what I'm going to play, and
Yeah.
I'd rather not have that be game one. Not that I want to dodge players like Devin, because I think he's a great example of somebody who it's like, no, I don't play with him all the time. Yes, I know he's a threat. Seeing him round one, that does suck. But no, there's no justification to not, pot us up. But I can think of again players that I've been in 150 games, 200, 1,000 games with, who I'm just like, it'd be cool if there's a mix-up.
Yeah,
I don't know the
I
right
get
way
that.
to do it. Yeah.
Well, I think I'll answer your question with
Sorry, I
my
didn't
own question.
really lead your question.
So your question was like, how can we more effectively have players not be paired against people that they play with all of the time? And my question in response would be, how much do you want true randomization for your tournament setup versus like more seeded pairings. So, like you'd mentioned before, the pairing software that we use from Top Deck GG right now, uh, the Command Tower software, for the most part, prioritizes not having repeat opponents, so that way you're not stuck against the same players. But then you can also get somebody who is first place against somebody who has 0 wins, and that's just part of the formula for having no repeat opponents. Similarly, they also implemented a adjustment to the percentage likelihood that you go first or last, depending upon how often you've gone first or last in previous rounds. So if you go first, second, then you're really, really likely to go fourth, or maybe if you're lucky, third in the last round of Swiss. But there's already been a lot of questions about how much we want the software to take care of the setup for us and how much we want to be within the agency of the TOs or within the agency of the players themselves for things like turn order or pod composition. So I turn the question back to you. How much do you think the software should be responsible for?
So I think that there are certain common sense things where we shouldn't have blanket rules that we apply to all tournaments in the name of fairness. And then let me rephrase it. So there are blanket rules that we apply to tournaments in the name of fairness that I think are in direct conflict with common sense occurrences. And I think that there should be more flexibility given to the tournament organizers and the judges and the players themselves, frankly, because that's a separate topic. But I think that there should be more localized power, right, in order to provide a better experience. And what I mean by that, because like, what's a better experience? I'm like, there's better gameplay. What I want is fairness, where it's like, what we're like, and here's, my mind is going too many places, and I got some questions to ask you. But I think that the thing that we're trying to do when we're having these tournaments is figure out who the best player is. And so any rules or formats and decisions that tarnish that figuring out of who's the best cEDH pilot here. I think that we could mitigate those. I'm like, so it's like, how do we identify that? Like, are there a whole bunch of differences that should be made? Like, should there be a whole bunch of discrepancies between the different tournaments based on the setting? It's like, then it's hard to get really good data. And so, and that's like the obvious trade-off, right? But I think that first metric, fairness, and it is like the biggest one, and that through fairness being like kind of like the guiding principle and providing whatever resources on the ground you need in order to make that happen. And it's like having too many buys and having that buy count as a win. It's like, is that fair? No. Find a. It's like, have the judge play and have it be like another judge from another store that's non-biased. Plug them in. It's like, that's a common sense thing that you can do on the ground. Does it give weird metrics? Yes, but it's like, it's way better than having like a buy that counts as a win for 3 players. It's like, can you imagine? Like it's there are inherent problems with the format of our tournaments that lead to serious skepticism about, if the winners are really like super great players. It's just like and so like it has to be played out over a long time, and that's why you have to put up multiple tournament results, and and that's why like all the data is so debatable and stuff like that. And so again, I think that the primary question should there be more flexibility for the tournament organizers and the local organizers, for that matter, and the local players who are associated with the organization of the event? Should there be more flexibility tournament to tournament in order to move towards that guiding principle of making it fair? I think so, because ultimately at the end, I want to know who the best player is. So like, we have our local tournament and or excuse me, local league, right? And this is a little bit of a tangent, but it's like, I love having access to players on Spell Table. I can put my hand up and be like, hey, really good players in Portland that are invested in this. Let's come and have a game. But then you look at the leaderboards and the rankings, and it's just like, how many games did you play? Well, that's the biggest factor there. It's like, and that's the first thing that everybody says. It's a big glaring issue. how do we organize tournaments in order to, and these leagues, in order to really determine who's the best player? It's like that is a nuanced discussion that
Mm-hmm.
involves a lot of people. And the biggest problem that I find is that anybody that comes up with a cohesive set of answers to that, my initial reaction is like, piss off. Like, why am I
Yeah.
listening to you? Why am I and so there are these authorities that are popping up right now because of the transfer of the ownership of the format over to Wizards, that are forming themselves in the cEDH community. And then, they're doing interviews right now for basically what's going to be the revamped EDH top 16 or whatever. There's going to be like,
Yeah.
you know, Ian and Friends, basically. And it's like
Mm-hmm.
there's a certain portion of me that's like, why do I want to listen to Ian and Friends? And um, is that really valuable for me? Like, does he really represent my perspective and interests?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is he going to be creating basically blanket rules for my format that I would rather have in the hands of my local tournament organizer?
Yeah.
Like, I think that that's a serious question that we're going to have to answer as players. Um, because I, again, am fundamentally uncomfortable with somebody that lives in a different meta doing a different thing saying that they know what's best for me because they just talked to somebody in my region, even if they,
Yeah.
you know, um, are really doing their due diligence and really like saying that they have full representation, even if they do on paper.
Yep.
Like, I still don't want them speaking for me,
Yeah.
So
I get that. And I think that's just kind of emblematic of the fact that, we're a lot of different players from different walks of life who are meeting in a somewhat loosely defined sub community of the Commander community.
Yeah.
So, like, I totally hear all of the concerns and all of the gripes with it. I just also don't know if there's a truly effective way, or at least I don't know it myself, and the only way that we can get an answer to it is by having more communication with RTOs, with our local players, and with people in the general community across state borders or across country borders. So, like, uh, my experience in cEDH is very different from somebody's cEDH experience in Japan.
Mm.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that one of us is more right than the other, than because of how many players we have at our local or something like that. It's just that it's a very complicated thing that's involving probably tens of thousands of voices of input, and getting to filter through that can be really difficult. But I think that the only way that we move forward on that is with the greater degree of communication.
I think you're exactly right. And what I mean by that is that magic looks different in different places, and that there will be grassroots organization that pops up specific to the region, and that is going to be what is valid to you. For example, like I just came back from Costa Rica. We had our honeymoon there, and got back a few days ago. And I was trying to get to these magic shops, and there was a few of them, but frankly, there's no cEDH scene, and that there are like logistical barriers in order to acquiring all the cards that would be present in order as such in order to like we take it like really for granted that we sit down at a cEDH table here and there's a significant portion of the decks that are real.
Yeah.
um, that is not a thing that exists for a lot of cEDH players in a lot
Mm-hmm.
of places. And so it's like as we're moving into this Wizards sanctioned thing, it's like we're already having logistical problems acquiring the cards, and that we're getting into the proxy conversation
Yeah.
really, but it goes back to the core of what you're saying, that Magic looks different in different places, and I think that there are these two opposing forces. The first one is like the organization structure that allows us to navigate the differences between the nuances of the different metas in different areas and the way Magic looks,
Mm-hmm.
and being able to have like that development, and be cohesive. And then there's basically like that opposing force that as that grows, there are players that are tossed under that blanket that don't feel represented,
Sure.
where it's like you it's there's the yin and yang of it, where it's like you need both, and ultimately it could be avoided in the perfect world that will never exist of Wizards being one entity that can do it all perfectly. And
Sure.
I don't think that's a realistic expectation.
I also don't think it's a realistic expectation that Wizards is going to do everything perfectly in the interest of the players. I mean, that's not a huge criticism to Wizards of the Coast.
Fair enough. Yeah, you're
company,
right. Saying it like that. Yeah.
saying it like that sounds like a significant criticism, but like we've already had people complain a lot about like power creep from Wizards of the Coast designing new Magic sets, and some players really like the power creep because it means that there's new and interesting things happening in older formats like Legacy or Vintage, and it's not just the same Ravager Shops deck as the top of Vintage for forever. But there are also players that are really upset because they value the longevity of things in their collection, being able to play them in older formats for longer periods of time. And I think on a somewhat smaller scale, we see that same kind of problem with the cEDH community in that as newer things get printed, a lot of older cEDH decks and cEDH win conditions get kind of pushed to the wayside. Like, when's the last time you heard somebody playing Boonweaver Giant and Pattern of Rebirth?
I'm not even familiar.
Exactly. Exactly. Meanwhile, that was one of like the premier win conditions in 2019 when I was getting into the format. Like, when's the last time you heard about somebody doing Isochron Scepter and Dramatic Reversal for... I mean, you're an Urza player, so obviously you know about it. But like, when's the last time Tim Thrasios played Isochron Scepter and Dramatic Reversal as an infinite mana combo when they now have Devoted Druid plus a million other things that go infinite with it?
Mechanics note, while we're here, I think more people should be running Lithoform Engine. If you're running that Isochron combo, I think Lithoform Engine is underrated because it also goes infinite with that Dramatic Reversal. And games are going long enough and it has enough tangential function, you should consider it. Anyway, so didn't mean
I agree. Lithoform Engine is also part of the new Paradox Engine lines for Conquest, Captain Sisay. So if Paradox Engine gets unbanned, I have to go buy my ass a Lithoform Engine for the deck.
Really? You know, what's so funny is I went and I bought a few Paradox Engines because I'm like, they're going to be shaking up this whole ban list. I went and I bought a Tolarian Academy that's going and sitting in a drawer somewhere. Yeah, I have my little case of, you know, in case of unbans, break it open. But
so I want to loop back around to another aspect of this conversation that you mentioned earlier, which is the proxy debate. And there is this inherent tension between if we want Wizards controlling the format and want it as a sanctioned format, Wizards is not going to allow proxies. But also, while somebody can sit down with like fully real cEDH deck, you have a fully real cEDH deck, I have a fully real cEDH deck, somebody can be sitting on either side of the table from us with proxies for whatever deck they want to play. And I used to be of the opinion that like I didn't want anybody to be playing with proxies because I bought the cards, why shouldn't they?
Sure.
But over time I realized that not everybody was as lucky to get a lot of their super expensive cards like the reserve list cards at the same time or in the same way that I did. Because I started in summer of 2019 while working 2 jobs and not having to pay rent, so I had so much extra income and bought a Gaia's Cradle for $329, bought a Mox Diamond for $400, bought my first couple dual lands for like 115 and 140 each, and now all of those cards are Gaia's Cradle's $700. Mox Diamond is $650. Those same dual lands are now $200 or $300 a piece. So I realized that not everybody was as lucky to get them at the time or in the same way that I did. And if I wanted to be playing good cEDH against good players, I would have access to more good cEDH players if I also allowed proxies. And so I've been encouraging a lot of people, especially like tournament organizers in our local area, to be open to proxies, so that way more people can participate in them. And I think that's been a really good thing for our local community. I'm not saying that it has to be the correct answer for everybody globally, but at least I think that our area has benefited from allowing proxies at some of our tournaments.
Yeah, and I think that if it's true here in one of the more affluent areas that plays Magic, then it must be true of areas that have greater logistical barriers to getting those cards, that it would benefit them as well.
Exactly.
And I think that, again, that guiding principle of fairness, where we're here to figure out who the best player is. We're here to, again, I mean, it's a cliche at this point. It's almost a mantra. We're here to play against your brain, not your wallet.
Yep.
I think you're absolutely right. We need to be able to incorporate that. And I think that there are just I don't want to call them, I don't want to necessarily say it's equity or equality considerations, but I think that we need to be, again, fair to the other players and recognize that Hasbro, is not supremely concerned with our play experience, and that a lot of
Exactly.
it, and this is a grassroots activity, and that this game ultimately is what we make of it.
Yep.
And I think that as a crew, that we should kind of move that power towards the players and try and keep it there. And I see it slipping away. Do you have any concerns in the future that Wizards is just going to tank this whole thing, and in 10 years we're just going to lose interest?
I don't think so. Now, I recognize that there's a possibility that that could happen, and I think I would be a fool to dismiss that that is something that could potentially happen, but as it is spelled out within Wizards contracts right now, so long as you are not sanctioning your tournament to be supported by Wizards, then you can do whatever the hell you want, including allowing proxies at your tournaments. So as it stands right now, with some of the really, really big Magic retailers like Star City Games, we've got SCGCon Portland coming up in a week with the cEDH 5K there. I hope I'll see you at that one, because I'm definitely playing in it.
Yeah, I'll have a ticket.
But will we see events like that being supporting proxies? I think no, because they have such a close partnership with Wizards, and they are having it as a sanctioned event to get Wizards judge staff on it and help bump up the prize pool. But if you have a local shop somewhere that wants to run a cEDH tournament, if they're not partnered with Wizards of the Coast super closely the same way that something like Star City Games is, so long as they're not trying to have the tournament be sanctioned by Wizards, they can do whatever they want. Now, that could possibly change in the future with Wizards getting control of Commander as a format, but as it stands right now, I'm not super worried about it.
Fair enough. Did you have anything else that you want to get out while you are on camera?
I think maybe touching on something like what works best for you as a player. So for me, when I say what works best as a player is I have a mulligan strategy for 2 of the 5 decks that I play. And just being able to take off some of the mental toll of all right, what am I doing with this? Of going, does it do this? Check yes. Then cool, keep the hand. Does it do this? Check no. Then all right, ship it back.
Interesting. Yeah. So I have the same thing with different archetypes of Urza and stuff like that. Does it have 2 lands and a rock, basically? It was or the equivalent of that, right? Or the equivalent work experience, right?
Yeah.
So I get what you're saying there. What other rules do you have as a player that you can stick to that you've found have worked over time, at least with the cards that you're playing?
Well, I think one of the general strengths that players should be more aware of is just how rules interactions actually work. So the biggest one that almost nobody I've met actually knows is how priority works.
In what aspect?
So players will misunderstand priority all of the time. Let's say that you and I are in a pod with players 3 and 4. You're player 1, 2, 3, and 4. If you go to cast a spell, then the next person in priority is the next person in turn order, who is me, right? So then I have the chance to do something about your spell. Then if I pass priority, it goes to player C, then to player D. But what most players don't understand is that once anything resolves off the stack, priority goes to the active player.
Yeah.
So let's say if you are the active player and you cast something, I respond to it, and I cast something, and then player C now has priority on my spell because I cast something, but they do something to counter it. Everybody passes priority on that spell, then that counterspell resolves, my thing is gone, we're back to...
So player C, at that point, because the counterspell had resolved, has priority?
No, player C doesn't have priority. Priority is back to you.
So because something... So you're saying that the priority goes back to the active player every time something resolves off the stack, regardless of who put it on there?
Yes.
I see. So I misinterpreted at the beginning, thinking that player C, because they had put a counter on player B, who is interacting with player A, would then have priority because their counterspell resolved first. But I'm saying that because that counterspell, regardless of who played it, resolves, it goes back to A, and they have priority.
Yeah.
And people misunderstand that.
So let's paint another narrative. Let's say that you are not active player. I'm not active player. Let's say active player is player C. But you cast Born Upon a Wind, so you can cast stuff at instant speed. Then starts this fight, all of the stuff resolves, but before I get to pass priority after Born Upon a Wind resolves, then player C has priority again because they are active player.
Sure.
They are the one who the onus is on to interact first.
That makes sense. So people are misunderstanding their obligations when they're supposed to be interacting due to the priority misunderstandings.
Not necessarily obligations, but
optimal play lines.
Yeah, I will say that there have been many times where like I'm in a pod with somebody and then starts some counter war, and then somebody goes, all right, well, priority is on you, and I'm like, actually no, priority is on you, and they have a counter spell, and then they go, all right, well, I'll use it. So even though I also have a counterspell, and I now don't have to use it simply because I pointed out that they have priority and not me.
I see what you're saying. So having a nuanced knowledge of the rules, specifically priority, allows you to priority bully or get other people to use resources in gaps that they have that they didn't know themselves were open.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm seeing you have rules with your mulligans that allow you to sift through hands more effectively, know what to keep and not keep, and you've found things that are effective over time. That's cool. I'd be interested in a deck tech, figuring out exactly what that looks like. And then you have, again, nuanced knowledge of the priority and the stack interaction and being able to point out different gaps that were not seen by other players and being able to exploit that. And in the case you mentioned, being able to get people to use interaction that otherwise could have come out of your hand. And those spaces, as we know, those interactions where they're using the counter and I'm not, or my opponent's eating that counter spell instead of me, that's what makes the game.
Absolutely. I think another rules interaction that only it seems like some of the more experienced players know that can get you some extra percentage points is the interaction with Magic Rule 514, which just talks about the anatomy of the cleanup step. And so you have your magic turn broken down into steps and phases, right? And in the ending phase, you have two different steps of the end step and then the cleanup step. In the cleanup step where you discard cards to your hand size, Magic Rule 514.1 just says that, all right, if you have more cards in hand than you are allowed to have, you discard down to hand size. Then 514.2 says the following effects happen simultaneously, saying that until end of turn effects end and damage wears off. So if you have like a 4/4 that got hit with Lightning Bolt, once you go to your cleanup step, it no longer has 3 damage marked on it. And then 514.3, which is where people can get a lot of extra win percentage, says normally players don't get priority during the cleanup step. But at this point, the game will check to see if any sort of state-based actions or triggered abilities would be put on the stack or changed at 514.3. And if so, then a round of priority is generated in the cleanup step. So I know that can sound kind of confusing, but let's break that down with a real-world example of cards that actually see play in cEDH. You've got Necropotence in play, and you pay life to Necropotence, you get a bunch of cards in your hand. Somebody, in response to Necropotence, casts Silence. But they can't counter the Necropotence, but you're like, all right, well, that happens. So you pay life to necropotence, you get cards to your hand, you go to your end step, you go to get the cards to your hand, and you go to cleanup step, discard the cards to your hand size. Now, Necropotence has a triggered ability that says when you discard a card, exile it from your graveyard. So it will put a trigger on the stack to exile the cards that you discarded. And since that trigger happens in your cleanup step, now there is a round of priority that is generated after 514.2 where silences players can't cast spells this turn wears off.
I see. So you can Born Upon the Wind out.
Exactly.
Okay, interesting. So the way that that's layered, I mean, that must be Rogsai 101. But that's a good point. Some players are just never going to understand those mechanics. The nuances of it are just too out there. But yeah, I couldn't have explained that to you before you just walked me through it. And that would have caught me in a tournament. But yeah, I guess it's the accumulation of that knowledge that makes somebody intimidating to sit across the table from them. Because there are certain properties that, again, are Rogsai 101 that I'm just not going to know about.
I actually learned that lesson from like the Gitrog monster because it specifically covers in its primer a section about winning in the cleanup step by using the cleanup step to sculpt your hand by discarding Dakmor Salvage over and over again. And if you get above 7 cards in hand, then you have to have a new cleanup step and discard it again. So you basically discard and draw through every single card in your deck and sculpt the 7 that you want. And then on the last cleanup step with a trigger on the stack, you flash in Oblivion Crown and do the whole loop at instant speed to win the game.
Yeah, see, it's just the way that you're able to explain the combo and recall specific interactions. That's just that's a skill that I envy. I don't have that. Okay, let's see if there's anything else I gotta get down before I let you go here. Trolls on YouTube. Okay, so
oh yeah,
we can go through specific comments. I don't think that's necessary. There's trolls on YouTube. We create content. cEDH players are an ornery crowd. How do you deal with them? I don't like them when I have to deal with them personally. People complain about my Urza list. Upsets me. How do you deal with them?
It depends on the day. It depends on what they're saying. Sometimes, like when I'm moderating for the cEDH Facebook group, sometimes somebody will just be a total troll, just a complete asshole, and I'm just like, all right, you're gone. Just be gone, fot.
Sure.
Other times it's about other times it's better to engage in them in conversation to kind of get why they are saying what they are saying, to see if you can find some bit of connection there in order to have them still be part of the community but not have the problematic behavior. It depends entirely upon what they're saying, what they're doing, and how they're engaging with it. If somebody's arguing constantly about like this thing sucks and blah 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 blah, it might be more worth having a conversation with them about like their experiences and why they feel this way, versus if they are just throwing insults around willy-nilly. That's not a person that you want in your community. That's not a person that you want to engage with. So I don't know. There's no good like one answer to deal with these things, but I find particularly in my interest and what I want for the community, I want it to be a welcoming and inclusive space. And so if I think somebody is worth conversing with in order to get them to change their behavior, I'll take that step. I will do it, even if it might be a little bit draining on me in the moment, because I think it's better overall for the community. Versus, like, I had a comment on Facebook a couple of weeks ago where somebody was just arguing something, and then I told them to tone it down, and then they were like, your mom should have toned it down last night. And I was like, all right, you're gone.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, it's tough because in some cases you do have the power, and in order to just be like, okay, you're out, it's not worth the time. And then there is that balance where you're like, okay, I need to foster the community, and even the members that are acting out, it's on me to make sure that I'm doing my part to make sure that I'm trying to include them in it. I get that, and that's part of, I guess, being a leader in the space, because there's a large portion of me that wakes up and stuff like that, and I'm just like, it's not on me to be the nice guy and look
Yeah.
the other way and stuff like that. And I'll say the sassy stuff, and and I'll like, oh
Haven't
man,
we all delivered
yeah.
a little bit of sass?
Yeah. So the last time so the spoilers come out with this new set, and so I'm on the Urza Discord, and somebody else, not me, posts, "Hey, this card is here, looks really good. I'm going to use it as a Spellskite replacement." And I'm like, I really like Spellskite, but I could see it replacing Malevolent Hermit. And somebody hops on there and is like, and I don't know why it got me so tilted, but he asked it with a question mark and was like, "Oh, this card has a disturb effect that makes your non-creature spells uncounterable." And I think part of why it annoyed me is because he was able to do that thing where it highlights your text in gold and stuff like that. I'm like, I don't know how to do that. Anyways,
I think that's just replying to the comment
really
specifically.
okay. Anyway, so anyway, he asked that, and I got sassy, and I was just like, if you read the card, you can see that it doesn't. Let me know if you need help. And I said that, and I immediately felt bad. And he's like, "Damn," he called me, said he was being catty, and I can't remember what else he said after that. And I deleted my response, and I just said, "Not worth arguing." And I'm like, whatever, because there's other people over in the little spoiler section that are out there having the same argument. It's like, it's not on me to go and explain to this person why I think this card is better. They can go to the spoiler section and see, the person that actually brought it up explaining the same thing that I'm going to do. I'm like, yeah, no, it's not on me to have this person sarcastically ask me and basically be like, asking a question, "Oh, you like this card? You must be dumb." It's like, am I drawing that line where he's putting it with the question mark and I'm feeling dumb? And then I'm like, what am I doing, wasting my time being annoyed by what is, somebody that doesn't put as much time and effort into this, who's not as invested. It's like, I feel silly for being invested in it, because this person is here being like, "Why would you like this card?" Pointing out something that I obviously already know, and then calling me dumb for liking it. And it's not even that I like it, it's that I am considering it. My point is, you can see like the spiral of like logic and wasting of time and justifying your own actions and like card choices that come from the trolls. And the question that I want to get to is, it's like, how much of your decisions on your play style and the cards that you choose is based on internal stuff? How much is based on external stuff? Because that external stuff can be split into, trolls and not trolls. But the internal stuff is, I think, what keeps somebody interesting and able to establish themselves with longevity, because I think that the trolls will pretty much just eat you if you don't have that internal part. So again, let me format that without a bunch of word salad. Your play style, your play decisions, and your card choices, how much of those come from an internal point? And when you get pressure to change things, do you trust external voices or yourself more? What's the percentage split?
I want to say that, I would love to say that it's 100% internal, 0% external.
It never is.
And it never really is. But I don't necessarily view it as like percentage of this much is me, this much is other people, as much as what other people tell me is them providing me information that I can consider. And so, like I mentioned earlier, for building green-white Sisay for cEDH, I got a lot of feedback from other green-white Sisay players, and at the end of the day, I still decide what's in my deck list, but they can recommend me something, and I will take that additional information of them trying to provide me with something that they think is good and go, okay, should I consider this? Will I try this out? Maybe yes, maybe no. More often than not, I will try something and go like, I can see the reasons why somebody would play this, but I don't think it necessarily fits with what I'm doing. But yeah, I just try to view the external influence as them providing me some level of information. However accurate that information will end up being to my experience is entirely on me to decide.
Do you feel like there's a disconnect sometimes where you, again, are like, these people just don't understand what I'm doing? Like,
oh, absolutely.
Like, explain that to me, because I feel like sometimes people recommend me cards and I'm like, you just don't get what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So tell me about your side of that. Like, when do you feel the most like you are just misunderstood?
Uh, that definitely happens a lot when people are providing that external information, that external pressure, and they don't have any clue as to what the internal monologue is, or
Mm,
what your internal thought process is.
sure.
So I got this a lot when I was first brewing Captain Sisay for cEDH, again, post Paradox Engine ban, where, like I said, I took my friend Rankin and Scott's cEDH monster friend list, and I was like, I'm going to tool this a little bit to more closely reflect what I think is going to work. But I had so many people, I had hundreds of people telling me that I was a bad cEDH player and should quit because I wasn't playing Rule of Law. And I had to explain back and forth. I was like, I'm not playing Rule of Law because my win condition is casting multiple spells in a turn. Like, I think the ability to actually win the game and not just stacks out the game is more important than, you know, preventing my opponent. I think being able to also win the game yourself is more important than preventing your opponents from losing the game, because then you just, best case scenario, if you can't win the game, you just get a draw.
So they didn't understand the focus of what you're trying to do.
Yeah. So I'm like, I have a Shaya, Soul of the Wild, and Quirion Ranger. I'm bouncing the Quirion Ranger to my hand and recasting it over and over and over and over and over again. If I play a Rule of Law effect, that doesn't happen.
Sure.
I literally can't win the game that way. Um, I still play stuff like Deafening Silence because it only stops one non-creature, and usually my win lines are going to only involve me casting creatures over and over again. But people got so saddled with the idea that, like, if you are playing stacks, you are playing Rule of Law, because Rule of Law is really good. And it was in the meta at that time, but people were too caught up on this that they did not also see the full breadth of, like, what I was trying to accomplish with the deck. Of, I'm making infinite mana by casting infinite creatures over and over again. Like, that doesn't work if I am playing my own Rule of Law. And I always use the saying, "Don't play stacks, that stops you too."
Mm.
And I've tried to stay as consistently uh, on top of that ever since then. Of, like, I will not play a stacks piece that also stops me.
Sure. Nombos not happening.
Yeah.
So what you were doing was exploring open space that hadn't been it was open space. People hadn't tried it out with Sisay before.
Mm-hmm.
And you were getting pushback because the efficiency of particular game plans that were associated with Sisay and individual cards that they could point to were just so hyper efficient that if you weren't using those, you could, again, just be ridiculed.
Yep.
And did you find that there was an uncomfortable phase post Paradox meta where you were trying things and failing and getting ridiculed along the way until it eventually worked? Is that kind of how the timeline went?
Sort of. So definitely, while I was brewing Sisay, after the Paradox Engine ban and after like 6 or 7 months afterwards, so the meta had changed a little bit by that point, not just because of Paradox Engine leaving, but like we mentioned, I was getting a lot of pushback because people associated, if you were playing stacks, you were playing Rule of Law. I'm playing Captain Sisay, and it is a stacks deck, but I'm not playing Rule of Law.
Mm.
So therefore, Captain Sisay is not a stacks deck. You're not playing it correctly. You're not playing stacks correctly.
Yeah.
You're not playing cEDH correctly if you're not playing Rule of Law in your stacks deck. And I'm like, no, that's not what happened. But I also wanted to point out one other thing. So you mentioned that I was kind of treading new ground. I was
exploring
new stuff, yeah. Which I don't think is also entirely true. There was a lot of new ground that I was trying to cover, a lot of new things that I was trying to try out, but something that I have very highly valued that I don't see a lot of other players valuing as much is that I like to look behind me to inform where I go forward. So what I mean by that is, when I first wanted to build Sisay after the Paradox Engine ban. Like, I mentioned that I copied Renkin and Scout's list, and I was like, all right, I don't like what win condition they have after you make infinite mana. I'm going to look at some of the Captain Sisay deck lists from during Paradox Engine days and from before Paradox Engine was even printed to see what they were doing to win the game.
Interesting.
So that's where I came with Kamal Fist of Krosa, a 6-mana 4/3 legendary from, what is it, Onslaught? That has pay a green, turn a land into a 1/1, and 2 of anything, 3 green, Overrun. Creatures you control get +3/+3 and trample until end of turn.
Interesting. Okay, so you were looking at things that were effective before that might be just forgotten a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I was like, all right, I'm going to try Kamal as my infinite mana outlet instead of having to find Selvala, Heart of the Wilds, and this other thing to blink it and draw your deck and then play Heliod and Walking Ballista. Yes. I'm like, I'd rather not play Heliod Walking Ballista in my deck, especially because I want to be playing Null Rods in order to beat the meta decks.
Sure.
So instead, I will have Kamal Fist of Krosa as my infinite mana outlet, and I'll just punch the table for infinite damage.
That's so interesting. So I ended up doing something similar. You articulated, and I didn't think about it that way, and I didn't do it on purpose. But my win condition, due to the same thing, me not liking the infinite mana outlet of traditional Urza lists, I use Aetherflux. It's like, dude, it's like Aetherflux is a classic, and it sneaks up on people because it's like, okay, you know, nobody's swinging at me. I'm Urza. What am I going to do with my life until Aetherflux hits? And then they're like, oh, only a couple of spells, and suddenly I just can't put a win on the stack without this, you know, sword of Damocles over my head. And it's like, I think, I think that that's, you know, again, something that's a little bit, like you said, overlooked, classic, comes from beforehand, and you just tune that thing up, put a couple of support pieces around it, and it's viable. So
yeah, I think that also kind of loops back around to a previous topic about dealing with internet trolls sometimes. In the weirdest moment of, like, cognitive clarity, I came up with one of the best lines that I've ever had when dealing with somebody who was a bit of an internet troll. And so we've all heard people accusing everybody else of being net deckers and sheep and, you know, not fall.
Sure, yeah.
And just following too much stuff, and they're like, I am doing my own thing, and I am successful doing my own thing. And there was one time, this guy had gotten into the cEDH Facebook group, and he was just so adamant about net deckers and people just being sheep and not original and stuff like that. But he had this weird idiosyncrasy in that he would talk in, like, weeaboo otaku, like, haikus all of the time. He would, like, try to make it, like, some quote from, like, Aristotle or something.
Was it impressive?
Like, no, this was just over.
I can imagine somebody doing it in a very suave way and being like, "Geez, dude,
it's just so dumb, right?"
Speaking in haiku, okay.
But, like, this guy had this weird idiosyncrasy of, like, he would always try to make it sound super poetic all of the time, and just
he's trying hard.
He's trying real hard, and shortly before I ended up removing him from the group because he was being problematic, I responded to one of his comments just kind of playing at his own game, and I said, he's arguing that everybody's net deckers and that they're not original, and I said, there is wisdom in the paths well trod, and you are a fool if you would ignore the lessons they teach.
Yeah, fair enough.
And I was like, oh my god, that is...
Oh, you said it to that guy?
I said it to that guy, and I was like, that is one of the smartest things I've ever come up with, and it was just because I'm trying to mock this guy.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I think it also perfectly highlights what I was talking about turning to things that were successful in the past and revisiting them now with a different frame of reference or a different lens, in that... like I said in that weird internet quote, there is wisdom in the paths well tread.
Sure.
And to ignore the lessons that they teach is a bit of a foolish errand. And so, if I look back at what Captain Sisay decks were playing before Paradox Engine or during Paradox Engine, with this new frame of reference, in that, alright, so I can make infinite mana and get infinite untaps of all my creatures here, what win conditions were people playing that I have access to now that I can revisit?
Jeez. Well, Jonas, thank you for sharing your wisdom of those paths well trodden. Where can people find you?
So you can find me on Facebook with Jonas Williams. If you look in the cEDH/Competitive Commander Facebook group, I'm one of the moderators there. You can also find me on Discord or in YouTube as Choirboy2020. And I think that's about. You might find me at your local tournaments if you're in the Pacific Northwest. So have mercy.
Fair enough. All right, take care. Thank you. Dude, nice. Easy.
Hell yeah.
That was a solid, so that was an hour and a half.